And turn to Hebrews 8. Christ has obtained a ministry that is much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. Have you thought about that? Right? I mean, that should be obvious. But if it was working, why wouldn't he have just continued with it? He introduced it to be a wrecking ball to human righteousness, not to provide it. We think he gave us the law so that we could be righteous. He gave us the law so that he could demonstrate to us in a way that we practically live day after day, I could never be righteous. He absolutely levels human confidence in our flesh to produce sustainable righteousness. Otherwise, the first covenant would have been more than enough. He says this, for he finds fault with it. Isn't that interesting that God would find fault with something he himself instituted? Now, some of your translations will say finding fault with them. But a lot of scholars say that that word is so much in question and the meaning is so much in question, it's not clear whether he finds fault with the people who broke the covenant, which is how we have rendered it. He finds fault with us. That's part of the way the law tutors us to Christ is it makes us guilty before God. That's a legitimate interpretation, but a powerful insight comes from a legitimate alternate interpretation. That God didn't find fault with the people who couldn't fulfill the law. He found fault with the law itself. Why? Finding fault with it, the law, he says, behold, the days are coming when I will establish a new covenant. I looked at this out of Ezekiel. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them to lead them out of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant. And so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make. I will put my laws in their mind and write them on their hearts, and I will remember their sins no more. In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. Why did he find fault with it? Because they couldn't keep it. So the covenant he made guaranteed their failure, and that covenant required humans to break allegiance to their Lord. That covenant required, because it aroused the sinful nature within them. That's what Romans 7 says the law does. He found fault with the covenant because it involved you and I in a commitment to God where we will prove to be unfaithful. Here's the deal I'm going to make with you. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. Do this and I'll bless you. Fail in this and I'll curse you. Be loyal to me. And now that covenant itself proves how disloyal they will be. It provokes everything in the sin nature that requires the constancy of the sacrifice to atone for and keep forgiving. And there's the reminder year after year of all the sins that are piling up because their nature hasn't changed. That's why he finds fault with that covenant, because it holds them accountable for the reality of their fallen nature without changing that nature and actually provoking it to further acts of rebellion that require constant sacrifice, ultimately proving our unfaithfulness to God in the very act of a covenant where we're promising faithfulness to him. That's a faulty covenant. I'm going to give it to you because we're going to run out of steam on this one. He finds fault with that covenant also because it ultimately requires the death of his beloved son. The consequences of our unfaithfulness provoked by a faulty covenant mean from the beginning of time he has to allocate his own son to bleed and die, to win us back from the judgment of that covenant so that we can finally have life in this long learning curve where we think we can do it some other way than loving him and fellowshipping with him. He finds fault with such a covenant because it requires the blood sacrifice of his own son to redeem the covenant breakers. The law is such that it doesn't matter how much you do right. It's the part you mess up that kills you. That is a back-breaking, impossible system when your own nature is inclined to darkness, until another covenant comes along that's so perfect in its substitutionary power that you die in him and are raised to newness of life. Now we've reset the game. This is a whole new game. It's not a better Adam. It's not a better old man. It's a new man who actually doesn't incline to sin, but inclines to righteousness and has to renew himself or herself to that reality. But the fact is, you can be a new creation, and that's not strong enough. You are. You are a new creation. I don't care how you came in here, what you felt like. If any man be in Christ, then he is a new creation. The old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. Right now, your confession over your life, I am a new creation. I am a new creation. You should find fault with the old thing. The old thing was killing you. So it killed him, and he became the initiator of a new covenant with his own blood. The eternal covenant has nothing to do with the faithfulness of man. The old covenant had everything to do with the faithfulness of man. The new and eternal covenant that we saw in Ezekiel, it's in Isaiah 54. It's recounted here in Hebrews. There's a number of verses that I skipped, but he basically quotes out of those passages describing the new covenant, where he's saying to the prophets, this Moses thing isn't working. I want to bless you. Instead, you're exiled. You're a captive nation in Babylon. Don't worry, I'm going to bring you back. But we're going to get somewhere in this where you're going to start to see the tablets written on stone are insufficient. I'm going to write the law on your hearts. I'm going to provide a new covenant because I find fault with this old covenant. It's killing you, and it's not my will that any should perish, but all should have life. In fact, abundant life. I have untold favor to pour out on you, but you're trying to merit it. That limits how much I can give you. I want you to believe I'm good. Out of my goodness, you'll get far more than your goodness could ever get. Out of my holiness, you'll live more holy accidentally than you could ever do on purpose under the law. It's a way better deal for you. It's going to cost me my son. It's all right. I'm God. He'll raise again. God disliked the contract at Sinai because it had zero transforming power. If you look back just a few verses before this passage in Hebrews 8, the very end of Hebrews 7 says just that. Oh, yeah, you got to back up further. Verse 18. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside. There again, the obsoleteness of the law. See, we're trying to continually resurrect it. But a former commandment is set aside. Listen to how God is describing that covenant, because it's weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. Verse 25, consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost. How far do you need to be saved? How far did the curse go? I love Handel's Messiah. He came to make his blessings flow far as the curse is found. How far does the curse go? How deep does your sin go? That's how far he goes. He saves to the uttermost by bringing that thing to death. And the old law couldn't do that. It made nothing perfect, but it required perfection. And he finds fault with that. But he finds delight in his Son. This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. In him the fullness of deity dwells. He's the whole deal, the real deal, the complete deal. And when he dies in your place and you get to die in him, he saves to the uttermost. And then on the other side, when he says, be holy as I am holy, it's because you're actually living in him.